The envelope is sitting on the kitchen counter when I walk in. It is a thin thing, cream-colored, with a return address in Scottsdale I recognize immediately. My name is on the front in my mother's handwriting, the looping cursive she uses when she wants something to feel formal, to feel like it carries weight. I pick it up. It is December 27th. 3 days ago, I stood in my parents' living room while my father explained, in a calm and reasonable voice, that the condo I had purchased, renovated, and paid property taxes on for 6 years now belonged to my sister Valentina. I do not open the envelope yet. I set it back down on the counter. I go to the window and look out at the parking lot below. Unit 4C, second floor, southwest corner. The place I chose because the light in the afternoon comes in at an angle that turns the hardwood floors the color of amber. The floors I sanded myself over a long weekend in October of 2018, kneeling for 2 days until my knees bruised, because I had budgeted precisely nothing for a contractor. The envelope sits on the counter. I pick up my phone instead. Welcome to Calm Revenge Tales, the channel where justice doesn't shout, it simply arrives. If you're new here, this is where we sit with stories about people who were written off, underestimated, or quietly stolen from. And what happened next? Subscribe now if you want to be here when it does. My name is Dessa Kowalczyk. I am a licensed structural engineer. I have been one for 11 years. I specialize in load-bearing assessments, the work of figuring out, precisely and without sentiment, what a structure can hold before it begins to fail. I find this useful in other areas of life. I bought the condo in 2017 with $47,000 of savings, and a mortgage I qualified for on my own income. A fact my mother mentioned exactly once, and then never again. I renovated it over 2 years in the spaces between projects, weekends, vacation days, the occasional sick day I spent grouting tile instead of actually resting. By 2021, it was appraised at $380,000. I had refinanced once to pull out $40,000 for a new HVAC system and updated electrical. The condo was mine. The paperwork was mine. The key was mine. I keep a spare key on a hook by the door, labeled in my handwriting. Aunt Oma. Oma is my father's mother. She is 81 years old. She came from Krakow in 1971 with a canvas bag and $11 and has, in the decades since, been treated by my family as a charming inconvenience, trotted out for holidays, ignored the rest of the year, spoken to in loud slow English despite the fact that she speaks it perfectly. She raised my father. She taught him to read in 2 languages. At my cousin's wedding, my mother seated her at the table nearest the kitchen because, and I am quoting here, she gets overwhelmed in crowds. Oma has lived with me since 2020. She arrived with 2 suitcases and a cast iron pan she'd carried from Poland. And she asked me, on the first night, where she should sleep. I showed her the second bedroom. She stood in the doorway and looked at the window, the same afternoon light, and she said, "You chose well, Dessa. This is a room that knows what it is for." I did not know then what she meant. I would eventually. The invitation came in the form of a phone call, which is how my mother delivers things she believes are non-negotiable. It was the 3rd week of November. She called at 7:14 in the morning, which meant she had been awake for a while, rehearsing. She said there would be a Christmas gathering. The whole family. Valentina was flying in from Phoenix. There would be a dinner, and afterward, a small announcement. Something wonderful, she said, something that will finally bring us all back together. She said this last part looking directly at me, or as close to it as a phone call allows. I had skipped Easter. I had skipped Thanksgiving 3 years running. I had become, in the family's internal accounting, the difficult one. The one who made things complicated by refusing to pretend certain conversations had not happened. I said I would think about it. My mother said, "Oma will want you there." This was not a coincidence. She knew the one argument that would work, and she used it without hesitating, which told me everything I needed to know about how the evening was likely to go. Oma, when I told her, sat at the kitchen table, and folded her hands around her coffee cup. She said, "We can go. I can sit next to you." She did not say she wanted to go. She said we could go, and she would sit next to me. There is a precision to the way Oma uses language that I have always admired. She never offers more than the truth. I should have paid closer attention to what she didn't say. I called my mother back and confirmed we would be there. December 24th. I asked about parking. She said to park in the street. My mother has a 2-car garage. She told us to park in the street. I noted that. I filed it. We drove 3 hours north on the 23rd and stayed at a residence, and I paid for myself $187 a night, because when I'd mentioned staying in my old room, my mother said Valentina's family needed the space. Valentina's family is Valentina and her husband Brecken and their dog Pretzel. Pretzel is a miniature schnauzer. He got the guest room. Oma and I shared a room with 2 queen beds and a view of a highway. And in the morning she made coffee on the tiny machine on the dresser, and handed me a cup without asking how I took it, because she already knew. We arrived at my parents' house at 5 o'clock on Christmas Eve. The driveway held Valentina's rental car, my parents' Lexus, and a minivan belonging to my Aunt Roxana, who does not go anywhere alone. The garage, I noticed, had a 3rd car in it. A silver Civic with an Enterprise sticker on the bumper. Someone had been planned for that hadn't been mentioned. The dinner was a performance. My mother had made borscht and pierogi and a roast she'd been preparing since Wednesday, and it was genuinely good food, which made everything harder. It is more difficult to be clear-eyed when the table looks like something from a memory you'd like to keep. Candlelight. The good china. Oma's cast iron pan sitting on the stove in the kitchen. She'd brought it without telling me, and my mother had used it to finish the potatoes. Valentina sat across from me. She smiled a great deal. Her husband Brecken talked about their recent renovation in Phoenix. Their house, which my parents had helped them buy in 2019 with a $90,000 gift that was described at the time as an investment in the family's future. I had not received a similar investment. I had, at the time, a mortgage. Oma sat beside me and ate without speaking. She ate carefully, the way she always does, like each bite is something she has earned. She drank 1 small glass of wine. When Valentina's daughter reached across the table and knocked Oma's water glass, Oma caught it without looking up. Her hands were faster than anyone expected. My father stood after dessert. He said he had something to share. He said that the family had discussed it as though this were a committee, and they had decided that the fairest thing, the most loving thing, would be to help Valentina and Brecken establish themselves closer to home. He said Valentina had been struggling. He said the Phoenix market was unpredictable. He said, and here is where his voice changed, dropped into the register he uses when he has rehearsed something. He said that they would be signing over the deed to my condo, in Chicago, Unit 4C on West Wrightwood Avenue, as a Christmas gift to Valentina and her family. The room went quiet. My Aunt Roxana's fork touched her plate. I did not move. I am trained to assess structural integrity before I react to it. I was assessing. I said quietly, "That's my property." My father said they had spoken to a lawyer. He said I was on the deed as a tenant with rights of first refusal under a 2019 document I had signed. Signed, he said with emphasis, when I had agreed to list them as secondary beneficiaries in the event of my death or incapacitation. He said this document, interpreted a certain way, conveyed transferable interest. He said the lawyer believed it was actionable. I knew immediately he was wrong. I am an engineer. I read documents. But I also knew that he had done this in public, in front of witnesses at Christmas, with the roast still on the table, so that any response I gave would look like a tantrum. I looked at my mother. She was looking at the tablecloth. My Aunt Roxana was looking at me. She opened her mouth. She closed it. I looked at Oma. She had set down her fork. She looked at me with her hands still and her face very calm, and she said softly, "We know what belongs to us." I stood. I said, Oma, get your coat. I did not raise my voice. I did not knock over a chair. I picked up my water glass and finished what was in it, and I put it back on the table exactly where I had found it, and I walked to the kitchen and retrieved Oma's cast iron pan from the stove, and carried it to the door. Valentina said, "You're being dramatic." I said nothing. We left. We drove back to the residence and without speaking for the first 20 minutes. The highway was empty. It was 9:47 on Christmas Eve, and the radio played something instrumental and minor key, and the heater in my car made a sound like breathing. Oma said eventually, "Your father has always been afraid of what people think of him. Even when we were in Krakow, he would not wear a coat he liked because the neighbors might say something." I did not answer right away. I said, "What do we do, Oma?" She said, "We go home." We checked out the next morning. I paid $374 for 2 nights, plus the parking, and I did not ask for the business rate even though I had one. On Christmas morning, I drove us 3 hours south on an empty highway and we arrived home at Unit 4C at noon. And I made eggs and toast and we ate at the kitchen table in the afternoon light. And it was genuinely the best Christmas I can remember. The days that followed had a particular quality to them. The quality of work. I called my attorney, Weronika Daybeck, on December 26th. She is a real estate and estate law specialist I had worked with during the refinance, and she is the kind of person who picks up on the first ring even the day after Christmas, which tells you everything about her. I explained what had happened. She asked me to send the 2019 document. I photographed it and sent it at 7:03 in the morning while Oma was still sleeping. Weronika called back at 8:45. She said what I already knew. The document was a beneficiary designation. It conveyed no transferable interest. My father's lawyer had either misread it, or had been told to misread it. She said, "They have no legal basis. But they might try to file a claim anyway, to stall." I said, "How long would that take to resolve?" She said, "Months. Possibly a year." I said, "What's my alternative?" She said, "Sell." That same morning my mother called. I let it go to voicemail. She said they were sorry for the confusion. She said my father had perhaps been too hasty. She said Valentina was devastated. She said, "We only want what's best for the whole family." She did not mention Oma. She did not say what she thought would be best for Oma, or for me, in a world where the condo I owned was transferred to my sister. My father called the following day and left a voicemail in a register I recognized. The measured, disappointed tone he uses when he believes he is being reasonable. He said he understood I was upset. He said he hoped I would come to see that this was about fairness. He said Valentina had always had a harder time of it. He said, and here is the part one have turned over many times since. He said, "You've always been the strong one, Dessa. You don't need this the way she does." I kept that voicemail. I saved it. I transferred it to a cloud folder I labeled with a date. Around this time, Oma began keeping a tin on the kitchen windowsill. It was a small thing, an old tea tin, the kind with a lid that required 2 hands to open, printed with a pattern of blue flowers that had faded nearly to gray. She put it on the windowsill the morning of December 27th, and she did not explain it, and I did not ask. Some mornings I noticed she had moved it slightly. Some mornings the lid was ajar. I called Weronika again, and told her to proceed with a quiet sale. If you're watching this and you don't know how this ends, subscribe now so the rest of the story finds you. I had the condo listed by a broker named Tomasz Lewicki on December 28th. At 9 in the morning. Tomasz is not a sentimental man, which is why I called him. He assessed the unit, reviewed the comparable sales, and listed it at $397,000, which was $17,000 above the appraisal. He said the market would bear it. He said there was a buyer pool for units in Lincoln Park with renovated kitchens and original hardwood. He was right. The first offer came in December 29th at 11:14 in the morning. $389,000, conventional financing, 30-day close. I countered at $394,000. They came back at $392,500. I accepted. I signed the purchase agreement on December 30th. The closing was set for January 22nd. My mother called 6 more times between December 28th and January 1st. My father called twice. Valentina sent a text message that read, "Dessa, please. We were going to let you have access still. We thought you'd be okay with this eventually. Can we talk?" I read it once and did not reply. Oma watched me work from the kitchen table. She made tea in the mornings. In the evenings she made a soup she had not made in years, a simple potato soup with dill from a pot on the windowsill, the same pot she'd started the week she moved in. She ladled it into 2 bowls and set mine in front of me without asking if I was hungry, because she already knew. On January 3rd, she taught me how to make her pierogi dough. The real version, not the one my mother uses. She pressed my hands into the flour and showed me the pressure, the angle, the amount of give you want before you know the dough is ready. Her hands over mine. 70 years of muscle memory moving through her palms. She said, "You will know it when it's right. You cannot write down how it feels. You just have to make it enough times." I kept making it. I was not yet very good. The tin on the windowsill had moved again. It was turned so the faded blue flowers faced outward. Veronica called me on January 15th. Her voice had a particular quality. Contained but with something underneath it, the way a structure sounds before a load test. She said, "I need you to come in. Bring whatever documentation you have on the condo, purchase records, improvement receipts, the beneficiary document, all of it. And if you have anything your father said in writing, bring that too." I brought the folder I had been keeping since December 26th. It was a green hanging file, the kind with a plastic tab, the one I use for every property I own. In it, the original purchase agreement from 2017, the renovation receipts totaling $83,400, the refinance documents from 2021, the beneficiary designation my father had quoted at Christmas, the appraisal, the listing agreement, the purchase agreement for the sale, and the voicemails I had transcribed onto paper in my own handwriting, dated and time-stamped. I also brought Oma's tin. She had given it to me that morning. She placed it on the table in front of me and said, "Take this with you." I asked why. She said, "You'll know when." The tin contained a single document, folded twice, in a handwriting I did not immediately recognize. The attorney, a man named Gerald Busk, from a firm in Naperville whose website had a photograph of Gerald in front of a bookshelf, sat on one side of the table. Veronica and I sat on the other. The room was a conference room on the 14th floor with a window that faced east. The morning light came in flat and gray. Gerald opened by explaining that my father's claim, while perhaps aggressive in its timeline, was grounded in a legitimate reading of the beneficiary document. He said this with the confidence of a man who has not yet heard the other side of a conversation. Veronica let him finish. Then she opened her folder. She walked them through the beneficiary document first, its precise legal language, its specific limitations, the 3 cases she cited in which identical language had been found to convey no transferable interest. Gerald's pen went still. She walked them through the sale, legally executed, closed on January 22nd, the proceeds already deposited. She said the sale had preceded any legal filing by 17 days. She said there was nothing to contest. My father said, "You sold it." His voice had a quality I had not heard from him before. Not anger, exactly, but something with similar dimensions. "You knew we were going to file and you sold it anyway." I said, "I sold my property." My mother pressed her hand to her mouth. Valentina said loudly that this was vindictive, that I had done this to hurt them, that I had always held a grudge. She said the word family 4 times in 1 minute. Gerald put a hand on her arm. Then Veronica placed the second document on the table. Yosef's letter. The succession claim she had filed on behalf of Oma's estate, which named me as sole executor, having been designated so in a handwritten codicil Oma had added to her will in November of 2022, 1 month after she received the letter and 2 months after she came to live with me. She had known. She had planned. Veronica explained the estate. 6.2 hectares current market value, the 14 months of accrued yield, the total in the holding account. She explained that as executor, I would be administering the claim. My Aunt Roxana, who had come silently and sat in the corner near the window, looked at the table. Her face did something complicated. She was the one who had almost spoken at Christmas. She was the one who had opened her mouth. My father's hands went still on the table. Gerald said something about reviewing the documents. His voice had changed register. My mother said very quietly, "Your grandmother gave that to you." I said, "She gave it to me in October. She asked me to take care of it. I told her I would." This was not true. She had given it to me in January, the morning before she died. But the thing it described, the care, the watching, the choosing, that part was true, and had been true for 4 years, and my mother knew it. The room was quiet. I placed Oma's tin on the table. I had brought it with me. The faded flowers faced the window, toward the gray morning light. I said, "She told me once that this room, the condo, was a room that knew what it was for." I think she meant that it was a place where someone was actually looked after. She wanted that to continue. Valentina was crying. I believed the grief was real. I held that. I said, "I'll waive any legal fees on the contested claim if you drop the filing today. You can make a clean exit. I don't need anything from you." My father looked at the table. He did not answer. Gerald answered for him. He said they would be in touch. They filed a counter-response 6 days later. They did not drop the claim. So Veronica proceeded. We proceeded. The contested claim was dismissed in March. The succession claim on Oma's estate was resolved in April. The holding account was liquidated and transferred. $103,400 after conversion fees and legal costs. I used $60,000 of it as a down payment on a 2-bedroom unit in the same building, 1 floor up, southeast corner, Unit 5D, with a kitchen window that faces the same direction as the old one, though the angle of the afternoon light is slightly different. The remaining $43,400, I placed in a trust designated for educational costs for whoever needs it next in the family. I named my Aunt Roxana as co-trustee. She accepted. She called me when she received the paperwork, and she said, "I should have spoken up at Christmas." I said, "You almost did." She said, "It wasn't enough." I said no. But it was something. Gerald Busk's firm withdrew from representing my father in March. The contested claim, which my father had pursued with the argument that a beneficiary designation constituted transferable interest, became the instrument through which Veronica demonstrated precisely why I had had every legal right to sell. The document my father had quoted at Christmas dinner, the one he believed gave him leverage, was the same document that proved he had none. Valentina and Brecken are still in Phoenix. My parents are in Scottsdale. My mother sent a card in April, a birthday card with no message inside, just her name, signed in the looping cursive. I put it in the green hanging file. I did not throw it away. I did not send one back. Both of these were choices. The cream envelope from December 27th, the one I had left on the kitchen counter without opening, contained a notarized copy of the beneficiary document, and a cover letter from Gerald Busk explaining that my parents were exercising their rights under it. I found this funny, eventually. It took a few months. I made Oma's pierogi for the first time successfully in May. The dough had the right give. I could feel it before I could explain it, exactly as she said. I made too many and gave half to my neighbor downstairs, Mrs. Petras, who is 74 and has a dog named Frida and who every Wednesday morning Leaves a plant cutting outside my door with a small handwritten note. The cast iron pan is on my stove. It is the heaviest object in my kitchen, and the most reliable one. I use it every week. It came from Krakow in 1971 in a canvas bag with $11. It has outlasted every version of the family that has argued over who gets to inherit what. The tin is on the windowsill of Unit 5D. It is empty now. I keep it turned so the flowers face the door, because that is how she left it, and I am not ready to move it yet, and maybe I never will be, and I think she would find that funny and correct. We keep the things we are willing to carry. That's what Oma understood that my family never did. What you inherit isn't property. It's the practice of showing up. The dough you make until your hands know it. The soup you ladle into a bowl for someone who needs it. The document you keep folded in a tin until the moment arrives. If someone in your life is being quietly overlooked, a grandmother, an aunt, a neighbor with a dog and handwritten notes, check on them today. Not a text. A call. Or better, go over. Share this story if it landed somewhere. Leave a comment if you've lived a version of it. Subscribe if you want to be here when the next one arrives. I'll see you in the next one.